Welcome to Behavior Grooves, the podcast that explores our human condition. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We talk with researchers, authors, and other interesting people to unlock the mysteries of our behavior by using a behavioral science lens.
It might be said that our attention is our most precious asset. What we pay attention to is incredibly influential in what we think, how we behave, what we value, and it plays a major role in shaping our self-identity.
The Stoic philosopher Epictetus famously wrote, "What you give your attention to, you become."
In the modern world, executive leaders work hard to ensure that their leadership teams and everyone who reports to them are paying attention to the most important strategies for the business. Political leaders sermonize frequently on the topics their party wants us to pay attention to.
And brands vie for our attention with advertising, social media, email marketing, direct mail, billboards, posters, event sponsorships, a variety of ways to communicate and persuade us. And they do all these things, from corporate leaders to politicians to brand managers, because they want to influence our decisions.
Now, we've spoken with Robert Cialdini about his immense body of work on influence and persuasion, and we encourage you to check out episodes 50 and 206 to get some more of his great insights. And his work lays out how we are being influenced by a myriad of environmental, contextual, and social pressures, all things that vie for our attention. However, in the end, it's up to us to decide what we do. We have agency. We have a choice. Our job, so to speak, in life is to make good decisions. We hold the belief that good decisions lead to a better life, a happier life, a more fulfilling and rewarding life. But the question is, how do we make better decisions?
When we think about making better decisions and improving our judgment, we often think about the cognitive processes that go into those decisions. We can go straight to the biases that predictably influence and sway our decisions, or we can think about the heuristics, the mental shortcuts that we put into place and can evaluate their effectiveness. And all of those are good. Our guest in this episode, though, has a slightly different way of framing the challenge. She focuses on who and what we're paying attention to.
Nuala Walsh is the author of Tune In: How to Make Smarter Decisions in a Noisy World. Nuala is a TEDx speaker, a contributing author to Psychology Today, and the CEO of a behavioral science consultancy called Mind Equity.
She's also a repeat guest on Behavioral Grooves. We've discussed fake memories and whistleblowers in episode 203, based on research that she'd conducted. And then in episode 2000, it's only 209. We
don't have that many episodes, Tim. But hey,
no,
it's an aspiration we can go to.
I guess so. But it was just 209 when we spoke to Nuala and co-founder of Gab's Steve Martin about the amazing work that the Global Association of Applied Behavioral Scientists are doing.
Yes. In this episode, we asked Nuala about her latest book and the difficulties that accompany this problem of who and what we're paying attention to. We talked with her about how we're often not tuned in to the right things, how we do a poor job of filtering what we are tuning into, and deaf ear syndrome, which we're glad she introduced us to this idea.
And we'll also talk about the strategies to overcome the challenges we have in this noisy world so that we can do a better job of tuning in to the good stuff, the meaningful stuff, the sources that help lead us to a happier and a more productive life, kind of like the way we find our groove.
Yeah, kind of. And the last thing we want to mention before we get to our conversation with Nuala is a request for you to support us. Not financial support, although if you want to, that would be cool. We have a Patreon site. You can go out there and donate there. But we are asking you for your support in the form of a rating or a review. We're asking you to scroll down to the bottom of your listening app and to push the star rating that you think we deserve. Or just take, 27 seconds to write a few words about how much you enjoy Behavioral Grooves.
As you can tell from this podcast we've released this year, we care a great deal about bringing you great insights from researchers, cool ideas from authors, and stories about behavioral science that will help you find your groove. We love communicating cool ideas to people around the world, to more than 140 countries, to be more specific. So we think it's a fair trade. We provide insightful content. You let us know what you think of it. Please scroll down now. Hey, all the cool kids are doing it.
Absolutely, Tim. And we rely on your reviews. They inform the algorithm used by Apple and Spotify to recommend behavioral grooves to people who are out there searching for behavioral science podcasts. It's sort of a pay it forward kind of thing.
Okay, back to Nuala.
Yeah. So we had a really fun conversation with an old friend that we hope you'll find as valuable as we did. So right now, we encourage you to sit back, grab a tall pour of focused attention, and enjoy our conversation with Nuala Walsh.
Nuala Walsh, welcome back to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here.
We are always happy to speak with you, and this is our conversation leading up to the introduction of your new book, and we're excited to talk about that. But first, we have to start with a speed round. Now, we know a little bit about your alcoholic preferences. We know that you're not a big beer drinker, but we need to know, do you prefer red wine or white wine?
Oh, red wine, Malbec. That's easy.
Oh,
Malbec.
Okay,
Ooh.
pretty specific.
Specifics.
Very nice. Okay.
Okay. When you were writing this book, which was better to helping you tune in? Writing in silence or with music on?
That's a brilliant question.
Tim wrote it, so I have nothing to do with that. I just got to read it. So that's all.
Yeah.
For all our listeners, that's a brilliant question from Tim.
It is a brilliant question from Tim. I would say the writing in silence, but the idea generation and going off piste, listening to music, probably while I was running or on a plane or on a train or something. So it actually is a combination of both. But the actual hard graft editing, you can do that, I would say, in silence. So the concentration and trying to follow, does everything make sense? But the spark, I do think the spark comes from the music, actually. So that was a very, very good idea. A very good question, rather.
Wow. Okay. Cool. I'll take it. Okay. Third speed round, and that's a great answer too, Nuala. Third speed round question: when making decisions, do we tend to focus too much on who we see, or do we tend to focus too much on what we hear?
Well, only somebody who has read my book could have asked that question or thought of that question. The answer is that we focus too much on who we see, Tim.
Yeah.
Because it is, of course, a visual world.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting, and we will touch on that as we get into our actual interview, as opposed to just the speed round where we're supposed to just do these quick, short little things, which doesn't happen most of the time, as our listeners quite know. All right, last speed round question. In your opinion, was Elvis good at decision making?
Oh, that's such a sad question.
It is. It really, really is.
Well, again, I will have to qualify the answer. When it came to musical decisions, yes, he was superb. When it came to his financial or health decisions, unfortunately, no, he was not. He over-delegated and listened to the wrong voices.
It's interesting. You start with this deep story. I mean, I've heard the Elvis story. You've heard some of the things with it's the Colonel, right?
Tom
I always
Parker,
forget. Yeah, Colonel and all of those pieces. But you go into a really deep analysis, and so help us understand. And I know we'll start talking about the book in a bit, but why did you bring Elvis in, kind of really up front in the book? What was it about that story that you felt kind of encapsulated what you were trying to say with the rest of the book?
It's a great question. I had done my introduction, and I hadn't got Elvis in there. When I started it, it was I suppose a bit more theoretical, and I don't know, something came up. I must have seen something or whatever, but he popped back into my mind. And we all knew the story, and I knew the story for as we all did for a long time. I started to incorporate in the story, and when I started, it actually read like his biography rather than the link to decision making. I got so into it, so it sort of didn't really work. And then what I did was I sort of looked at all of the perimeter traps and wondered how this actually fitted. So I had read, I said, about 5 different books, and I deliberately read them with a view to decision making error and misjudgment rather than anything else. And what I wanted to do was make it very clear to people that it didn't matter how much money you had, how much talent you had, how much privilege or a status you had, that we were all prone to making these decisions. And we all would sit there and say, well, I wouldn't have done that. And, I would have done this differently. But the fundamental drivers behind why he did make some of these incorrect decisions based on context as well as everything else, I think really brought it to life. So I probably enjoyed writing that bit more than anything else. And then I decided to sort of bring it through the book, certainly not all of that, but just little references to people in his world. And I did that with any character that I brought in. So I wasn't writing fiction, but I did think that having some characters whose story might have come through the different misjudgment traps, because every misjudgment trap can be triggered in a number of different ways. So you could have done one individual, one saga, and brought it the whole way through and said, well, does the perimeter, do these traps, misjudgment traps apply? And actually, I'm still listening to some of those stories, which makes it, which puts it in even more greater context. So I guess in the same way, part of our world in behavioral science or even business is to diagnose the problem. I think doing a really deep dive into why people make decisions and doing that behavioral diagnostic, only then are you in some position to be able to opine or to learn from someone else's. I mean, it's too late to opine in this case, but to at least learn from this. And the tragedy of this one is that the greatest voice of all time didn't hear the voices that really mattered, and which I think is a terrible tragedy. And as I did write in the book, I did go back to Graceland only a couple of months ago with my husband. I also went to Tupelo, where he was born, and the irony of standing in a 2-bedroom, 500 square feet wooden home, was I thought was even more relevant. And in behavioral science, as we know, you talk a lot about context. It just made it so much different and really put more nuance into the decisions that he made or didn't make. And so it's not just the decisions he made. I think it's the decisions he didn't make, and then the decisions that he delegated as well. So it's an absolutely fascinating case study from a decision-making perspective, beyond I guess the more well covered areas of health.
That's fantastic, Nuala. That you said that beautifully, and I love the very personal side of your journey with Elvis. And you brought up something that I thought was really interesting, and it may be a little counterintuitive because we haven't really gotten into the tuning in part. But what about tuning out? You actually start kind of the book by sort of sharing the problems of not being tuned in or tuning out to the right things. Can you describe that concept for the groovers there who were listening?
Yeah, well, they're two sides of the same coin, obviously. I mean, I wanted to call the book Tuned Out, actually. But that I wanted to call it Tuned Out because I think the problem is tuned out decision-making, tuned out leadership, if you like, which is, a crisis in today's world. So they're two sides of the same coin. Being tuned in is obviously, when you, I guess, reinterpret what you hear or you decode information rather than, the person who tunes out, just encodes what they hear. They take information at face value. We jump to conclusions. We tend to misinterpret, mishear, and we all do it. And we all do it at different points in time. But in a noisy world, in today's world, with so much data, so much distraction, so much disruption, I argue that people hear less than ever before and in turn feel less heard. So you almost have this dichotomy of, people who are heard and people who are unheard. And as individuals, we all think we're heard. We don't pause enough to even consider the fact that we may not be. So the book is almost, yes, to listen, it reinterpret what you hear. So it's not particularly listening. It's about reinterpreting what you hear and going to that second order, third order effect. Just as much as it is, not tuning out, as it were.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that it's not just about listening; it's about reinterpreting that piece as you talk about, because I think that's a key insight that I think is brought forth throughout the entire book. I want to go. You wrote, and I'm going to quote here. You wrote, "We live in a noisy, polarized, tone-deaf world where the risk of tuning out is rising and amplifying human error."
Yeah.
Now, Nuala, that sounds pretty impossible to overcome. It's kind of down, it's good. It's like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Should we begin by tackling this chaotic world to improve our decision making, or how do we overcome the noisy, polarized, tone deaf world that we're living in? And what do we need to do?
Well, you're right. You can look at this at an individual level, an organization level, or a societal level. You're not going to change society as an individual. You can change your own environment, and we know that. We know we can create our own individual space, our own environment. So you can control who you listen to. You can influence, who an organization listens to. Which voices are they going to listen to? The maverick or the most senior voice, the loudest voice, the most celebrated voice rather than the most relevant or reasonable voice. And, in this world, there is an argument that says, well, we have to listen to everybody. Well, I think you don't have to listen to everyone. You can't listen to everyone. You can barely listen to the person in front of you. You only operate at 25% efficiency anyway when you're listening. So it's not possible to listen to everyone. And all voices are not created equal when you have a particular decision to make. So, Tim, if you were making a decision, or Kurt, about any particular area, you're not going to just go and ask everybody because it's the right thing to do and you want to make everybody feel good. You're going to go to the source that can give you the best answer. But I think in today's world, there is pressure on leaders to let's listen to everybody. Well, sometimes in a high stakes situation, you don't have that luxury. So it's about filtering out the best voice rather than every voice. And even then, when you look at the different, I guess, types of voices that you may or may not be listening to, you've got the voice of conscience or the voice of common sense or curiosity. But from a behavioral point of view, we know that most people don't even go there. They go to convenience or the voice of comfort or even the voice of the crowd just to help make those decisions. So you can control your own environment. You can influence your organization. And hopefully, if you're in a position of power, you could definitely help from a societal point of view. So it does depend on the power spectrum and what situation you're talking about. So yes, we can't solve the world's problems, but we can influence them.
So what I'm hearing is that, me toning out Tim on a regular basis is probably okay because,
because I'm a bad voice in your life.
I'm just making a comment there. I'm reinterpreting, what I'm hearing. So
I'm curious, Nuala, I don't, and this may be a little esoteric, but first of all, why do our decisions matter so much? Right? We're listening to all these voices. Does any individual decision matter so much that it's going to make our lives better? And if it is, how do we decide what makes a good decision?
Well, I'll start with the second bit. How do you decide what makes a decision? Well, what makes a good decision? Well, I'll tell you what doesn't, and that's outcome bias, which is, if you consider, quite recently, Alexei Navalny, his return to Russia, was it a good decision or a bad decision? Hindsight, the outcome will shape your thinking as to whether it was a good or a bad decision. So you know all about outcome bias. So, well, somebody might say, well, that was a bad decision. Look at what happened. But it could be a rational decision if he was looking to overthrow the government and improve his own seat of power. So we rush to judgment to decide on everything, and we rush to judgment about these outcomes, and we assume, well, that wasn't a very smart decision because, look what happened. But actually, if it achieves something else, and that's the problem, is that we do rush to judgment in terms of what's good and what's bad, and we don't pause to think, well, maybe there are other factors for consideration in terms of whether something is good or not. And then the other thing I'd say about that, Tim, is, who decides what's a good or a bad decision? Well, if you're suffering regret over some decision and someone else isn't, well, your pain of regret, well, it's not a good decision if you're suffering, is it? So, by definition, and then if other people suffer, so it's the sufferance to you and the sufferance to other people as well, also have a bearing, and maybe the scale of the suffering based on your decision. So I think it's binary to say was this a good or a bad decision? And whether it was good or bad, you know that you're going to justify it anyway. You're going to tell yourself a lovely story as to whether it was if it was a bad decision. You're going to explain it in terms of all of these factors, in terms of why you did X, Y, and Z to make yourself feel better, because we can't deal with cognitive dissonance. But when you're in a position of power, social media won't let you do that now.
You brought up the Alexei Navalny thing, and this reminds me of the James Comey example that you give in the book about the Buridan's ass dilemma, which I'd never heard of before, by the way. This was pretty fascinating to learn about Is it Buridan's? Buridan's ass? Buridan's ass dilemma. And this is, so just to kind of set this up, this is where the question about Alexei Navalny going back to Russia gets to the question about, was it really a good thing overall? Was it good for him? Was it good for the country? Was it good for the resistance movement? Was it, sort of the lens that you use with James Comey in leading up to the 2016 election in the United States, when he reveals that Hillary Clinton is under investigation, and how he felt about that at the time, and how it impacted the election, and how it impacted, who wins and Trump and all that kind of stuff. But it was sort of the right thing to do at the time. So I think it's really interesting. It felt like the lens that we bring to our deciding or our judgment, our measurement, has a lot to do with whether we think it's a good decision or not. Is that a fair way of thinking about it?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think what might look like the right decision at the time may not be the right decision in the long term.
Yeah.
And, in organizations, people do the right thing. I mean, I would equate that to even whistleblowers. A whistleblower is doing the right thing at the time. They're not doing the right thing for themselves, because, as most whistleblowers get harassed, they lose their job, they get ostracized, and they have very adverse consequences. But speaking up is doing the right thing, but there is a price to pay for that decision and for that judgment call. And that's an example, I think, of a group that doesn't get a fair crack at the whip, if you like, and but it is a group that is absolutely instrumental to moving society in the right way. But I use whistleblowers also maybe as an example of deaf ear syndrome, where people tune out whistleblowers quite considerably because they don't want to hear it, and then enter the ostrich effect. But that is a very good example of where James Comey listened to the voice of conscience, which was it was conscience to do the right thing.
Right.
At the time, maybe it was short term, maybe it was long term, maybe. But at the end of the day, people make decisions that they can live with the consequences most of the time, and hopefully it is the right one. But I do think that that's an example of, if you like, when you don't listen to those whistleblowers, it is a very good example of a death spot, like in the same way that you might tune out a moaner or someone, or a maverick or any kind of minority group, just as much as you would for people who brag, or a bully or a bore. You don't listen to them, so it's an interesting example.
Yeah, I always go back in this to Annie Duke and some of the work that she's done on this. And I always, she uses the example, look, the outcome bias that you talked about, I can run through a red light and I can go through and not get in an accident. And you can go, well, that was a good decision then because you made it through. The outcome was good. You speeded up your time to get to the destination. But is that repeatable? And if you did it again and again and again, would it be a good outcome? And I think that's a really interesting part of what you're talking about here is looking at this and saying, all right, within this context and this time, yes, it's right. If you came up in that situation again, would that decision be the same decision you make given the situation? And I think that's a really interesting piece. I do want to go and talk a little bit, because in the middle of the big portion of your book, you talk about it's focused in on bias-triggered traps in our decision making. And since the early days of behavioral science, biases have gotten a bad rap, I think, in some ways in different pieces. But you bring in a really neat little acronym called perimeters and a different judgment trap for each letter. Now, we probably don't have time to go over all of them, and we want people to be intrigued and to go out and buy the book because it's a good book. So, but with that, is there, and I know this might be like asking you, like, what's your favorite child, but, do you have a judgment trap that you go, oh, if I could just get this, if people knew about this would, or maybe two or three, right? What would those be?
It's a great question, and as you know, none of them stand in isolation because they all interact with others.
Fair enough.
I do like. I think I think no matter what stage of your career, I think the power based misjudgment traps matter. But I think that if you look at what stage of your career you are, what matters is if you're chasing power, or if you're, if you're at your early stage and you're desperate for power, or you're at the height of your career and you're desperate not to lose power, or you've lost power. What are the biases that play to your? I mean, I gave the example of John McEnroe, who was, at his peak and he lost power, arguably. Now he's regained it now, because I like to put in some people who've regained it. I also gave the example of Yahoo, 53 different acquisitions, 52 failed. Well, is that power? Is that ego? Is that, I don't know what that is. Bad judgment to a T. But there are lots of those examples. So I suppose I would think the power one, because no matter where you are on the spectrum, you are vulnerable to making a bad decision because you want some form of power. I think the one that was hardest to write was actually memory-based traps, because we don't think about it. It's kind of nebulous. It's a thought that you don't easily get to, memory, but it's all, but the stories in there I thought they were fantastic, and I wanted to put them in because they were all about the power of suggestion and therapists, abusing these, and people just not being aware that, the power of suggestion as a trap is enormous. It doesn't have to be deliberate, but it can be used on you, and you're just not aware of it. So we see it I see it as a source, these sources of false memory, whether it's, the salience of information or the sequence of information. So even or even information repetition, it's evident everywhere we go. And if you are more aware of how this affects you, and we all think our memories are right, and we all think, well, we don't want to lose them, but actually you do get them wrong. But the problem is we use those memories to feed future decisions. And in companies, we rely on people who have memory frailty. I'm really interested in the fact that the US press is talking about Joe Biden, so openly now. People don't talk about Warren Buffett like that. And I think he's got, an age edge on Joe Biden.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Queen Elizabeth was 96. Exactly. So there is something in there that people don't fully appreciate, that it can be an issue at a certain stage. So I found that the hardest. I found power and ego were probably the easiest. Emotion was difficult because there were so many of them. Each one of them could have been a book. But I wanted to put in enough variety, not just in business, but whether you're talking about, space and astronauts, professors who got it wrong, politicians, business leaders. And serial killers, there was quite an element in there as well. And the legal system, I wanted to make sure that it covered the spectrum of judgment or misjudgment.
Yeah, serial killers. That was you certainly spent a fair amount of time on John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy and those guys. I thought that was fascinating. We are talking to Nuala Walsh about her newest book, Tune In: How to Make Smarter Decisions in a Noisy World. Let's talk a little bit about what to do about this. There's these judgment traps that are very real and very sticky, but you have a good portion of the book dedicated to the judgment strategies, sort of how do we deal with these things, and you use SONIC as your acronym to kind of walk through these. I thought that they were fantastic. But tell us about judgment strategies and why do we need them?
Yeah, I try to make it easy in some respects, and I know that there are lots of different strategies that people can use. It was very hard to, I guess, pinpoint them, because each I could have put in each misjudgment trap. Here are 2 or 3 for each of these, for power or ego or whatever. But I deliberately didn't, because they all interlink, and there is a force multiplier effect across them all. But we know I introduced the idea of decision friction, and we know friction has negative connotations. The unwieldy, energy depleting process that prevents a seamless experience, whether you're talking about application forms or subscriptions that are really hard to cancel, that you can't cancel. But I did sort of think it through, and I thought, well, a problem in one domain can actually be a solution in another. And in actual fact, if you make it decision friction, all it says is that you need to slow down. And I gave 2 or 3 evidence-based examples that showed that, for example, Mary Budrow found that every second of reflection counts towards improving your judgment. Now, I know we might know that, but we don't do it. So it's one thing to know it, it's another thing to do it.
Right.
So I deliberately introduced this idea of decision friction, and all it is a series of conscious prompts or nudges or rules or questions that jolt you out of this impulsive system 1 thinking or rushing to judgment, slightly more into the deliberative system 2, but it's anything that allows you to pause and reinterpret what you're hearing. Again, only when it's for something that really, really matters. So I guess I would summarize it to say you're interrupting your own mindset. You're interrupting this default, to just rushing to judgment, as well as trying to interrupt other people as well. So it's interrupting your own mindset. But I did like this idea that if you wanted to become a decision ninja, all you have to do is just think about decision friction as a bit of a mental speed bump to help you slow you down and become more intentional to notice what's said and what's not said. And it's exactly what journalists do. If they're interrogating various sources or investigators who are trying to, crack cases. And I gave you a fantastic example in the book from Jeff Ryan, an FBI investigator. And I won't tell you the story because it's too long, but I thought that was absolutely fantastic story. And I was thrilled to have him. Actually, he endorsed the book, which I was absolutely thrilled with, because it is such a moving story in terms of what he did, and by tuning in to the voice of empathy, what he managed to achieve. But you see it in business as well, and negotiators who win deals as well.
Yeah.
So that you avoid these despots.
Yeah. So with Sonic, you talked about interrupt your existing mindset, which is the I within Sonic. We talked about slow down, which is that S. Do you want to kind of overview the O, N, and C as we talk about that? Help our listeners understand a little bit more about some of the judgment strategies they can apply?
Sure. Well, in order, as I say, slow is slow down, and I've added in a few in there that people can use. The O stands for organizing your attention. And that's exactly what you were stating earlier on, Tim. You were saying about, can we control our own decision environment? Well, just like a supermarket designs its aisles, choice architecture, is the bedrock of behavioral scientists, as we know. But this principle can be used by you, as your own decision architect, to think about where do you go to reflect and make those decisions. It could be your kitchen, your garden, or the bedroom. It's like your question about, do you listen in silence, or do you make decisions, listening to music? Where you consciously reflect and declutter your mind, it's a very intentional thing to do. And there are lots of books around the distraction detox and different methods that you can use. So organizing your attention, so you're deciding that you're going to focus on whatever this issue is that you need to sort. And then the N was for navigating novel perspectives. And it's really easy. I mean, these aren't difficult ideas, but it's just picking whichever one that you like, that you're comfortable with, that works. So a very simple example, De Bono's thinking hats, which absolutely anybody can use. And that is just 6 different ways to think about a problem. And I used to do this when I was, when I was working in corporate life. So no matter what I was communicating, I would think, well, what are all of these different people going to think about this particular issue and how I say it? And in the exact same way, if you're looking at a decision, you go around in your head, whatever the 5 or 6 different voices or audiences are that really matter. So that's kind of an easy one, consulting, getting third-party opinions, looking left, right, north, south, for every decision you have. And then the C was just calibration. And then for the calibrating the situations, I deliberately talk about creating this interpretation or reinterpretation habit, having an implementation intention that you're actually going to do this. You want to be a decision ninja, and just here are a couple of really easy ways that you can do it. And of course, not surprisingly, there will be a checklist that anybody can download and just go through it and see, given that I'm in this situation, am I more likely to be prone to, a power, emotion, or an identity based trap? And if so, what are the two or three things I should watch out for? And if so, just look at the sonic strategies and think of which one is most important. But so the point is that if you practice using this checklist, that then it becomes much easier in your head just to run through the perimeters in your head. And then when you're in a difficult decision about a job, speaking up or breaking up with somebody or whatever, you can use these traps. You're more familiar, and it is, of course, a habit. And we all know how important habits are.
Absolutely. I got to give you incredible kudos for figuring out how to weave Elvis and Herb Simon into the same story. I just thought this is sort of my magic, right? Magic that I truly appreciate is to bring a Nobel-winning economist into the same story as Elvis, and being 1957 kind of being the crisp thing there. But just this whole idea of bounded rationality and the work that Simon did really seemed to hit with Elvis, right? That he was super strong in one area, but not in the other. What is it? I am curious. I got to go back to Elvis, though. Why were you drawn to Elvis in the first place? Was it before or after the visit to Graceland?
Well, I'd been there 30 years ago. So I'd been there 30 when I was on a J1, as they called them.
Yeah.
We had a Delta, one of those Delta passes, and believe it or not, you could go around America for $80 on Delta. Can you believe that? Within 30 days. Yeah. So I think I did about 25 cities in 30 days, and one of the cities was Memphis.
Wow.
So I had been there with my husband years and years and years ago, and so it was always somewhere there in my mind, and we loved it then. But as I said in the book, I'm not a rock and roll super fan at all. So it's not that I don't have a poster of him on my wall or anything. It's just that. I suppose I was gripped by the recent stories, and just then remembering all of that piece. But it's funny though, when I said that I wasn't a big fan, I did then remember. Well, actually, when I went to Vegas, I think I might have looked up Elvis, the Little Chapel. I might have gone to the Little Chapel once upon a time. And I thought, well, maybe there's something in there somewhere. So maybe it wasn't as far back as I thought. So yeah, my husband reminded me of that. He said, "Well, you say you're not a fan, but actually remember, we actually did go there."
Yeah.
So maybe it's my memory. Yeah, memory's not so good.
Okay, well,
we always rewrite our memories, and we always, that's part of, as you talked about in one of those the elements of the biases. So
we're not here to prime you with this all this discussion about Elvis, but if you were stuck on a desert island for a year, Nuala, and you could only bring two musical artists' catalogs with you, which two artists would you bring along to listen to?
That's actually really hard.
It's not a go to your grave question, by the way.
No, but still, no.
Yeah.
Well, it's about a point in. Well, now I might say that I think I might bring Celine Dion, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, I might bring Celine, because I think you probably want one to get you going and to bop, because you're bored, so you want to dance on your island. So I'd bring one boppy thing, not that Celine is boppy, and then I might want something contemplative like Celine Dion, which she's got a different kind of vibe. I don't actually like rock and roll, so I probably wouldn't bring Elvis for that one. Who would I bring for a bop? Well, I'm an 80s person, so I'd bring a compilation of the 80s. That's what I would bring.
Okay.
Compilation of the 80s hits. Yeah. And then Celine, because she'd be my.
Yeah. Is this going to be like sort of the power keyboard pop of I don't know, especially sort of a lot of the British stuff from the early 80s? Is things you can dance to? Is that what you're kind of looking for?
It's this Duran, I think, is what.
Yeah, Duran, Flock of Seagulls. I don't know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that'd be quite retro, wouldn't it? Yeah, I probably would. Only 2 albums. I'd probably bring those. But that's a very hard question, Tim. That's very hard question.
I was going to say it could be. I mean, the '80s compilation is you got Bruce Springsteen, you go to Michael Jackson, you got all sorts of Depeche Mode to all sorts of different pieces. So that's it's a very eclectic mix. I like that. So
yeah. Well, actually, I'm going to see Bruce Springsteen next month. So yeah, good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My God, isn't that amazing? Yeah,
the boss is still out there.
Still out there traveling.
Isn't it amazing?
True.
Isn't it amazing? And we won't do our Elvis to death, but you do know the story about how he climbed over Graceland's wall when he was very young in his early days. Bruce Springsteen, yeah,
no,
he tried to get into Graceland. He climbed over the wall in his early days, and he got to the main door, hoping. I mean, Elvis is his idol to a T. And he climbed over the gates just at the side. He didn't go past the security guards, but he climbed over the wall, I should say, not the gates, the wall at the far end, and made it to the hall door until he was thrown out. just to connect our theme here.
Nicely done. I didn't. This is a new musical trivia thing for me. I didn't know that about the boss. So, Nuala Walsh, it is always a pleasure to speak with you, and we want to thank you for being a guest again on Behavioral Grooves.
Well, thank you very much. I look forward to the return, and thank you both again. You are indeed fantastic podcasters. Always a pleasure.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Nuala, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our tuned-out brains.
There it is. There it is right there. We are too often tuned out.
Too often. I'm just tuned out like 90% of the time, I think.
Well,
95, maybe 98.
Well, this is tricky because we're cognitive misers.
Yeah.
What did Wendy Wood tell us? That's more than 60 or 70% of our day is routine and habit.
Yeah.
So the little time that we are tuned in, I think that this adds value and emphasis to Nuala's book and what we got to talk about here in their grooving session.
Well, I just know that, I'm only tuned in when I'm interested in what somebody's saying. So like with you, it's never. And then, it's, my wife all the time. So there you go.
Right. God love Aaron for that. Okay.
Love you, honey. I know you're listening.
Yeah.
So there you go. No, in all reality though, I do think you're right. I mean, as Wendy Wood said, so much of our life is built upon the habits and routines that we have, that we just go through many of the motions. And again, it comes back to, I think, a big part of this. And one of the things I want to talk about at some point on this is how does tuned in align with being in your groove? Because part of what we're talking about being in the groove is paying attention to those moments that really matter. And by doing that, savoring those moments leads us to a better life. This idea that, just smelling this coffee that I'm drinking and enjoying the taste as opposed to just guzzling it down because I need the caffeine are two very different experiences. And I get two very different results from that, right? So one is the savoring aspect of taking this drink,
which you're doing right now.
Or I could just guzzle, there you go.
Glug, 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 glug.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's get to that though in a couple of minutes. Where should we start?
So I think, again, we talked about this, right? We're tuned out a lot, and tuning in is potentially one of the solutions. And Danny Kahneman, of course, we come back to Danny Kahneman. He talked about what you see is all there is, the WYSIATI or whatever the stupid acronym name that they gave.
WYSIATI. Yeah. Okay.
But again, I think we don't always think about where our attention is, right? I mean, it goes back to the what we said at the beginning, Epictetus. How do you say his name?
Epictetus.
Epictetus. Yeah. There you go. What did he say?
What you give your attention to, you become.
Yes.
That is beautifully said. That is great economy in using the words, but it's so true about the human condition.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Nuala's challenge to us is, what are you going to give your attention to? Who are you going to give your attention to?
And in particular, in this noisy, polarized, tone-deaf world, as I quote, she says, we live in a noisy, polarized, tone-deaf world where the risk of tuning out is rising and amplifying human error. And I love that, because when we think about this, it's so easy in this world where we are deluged with all of this noise, right? We talked with Olivier about noise.
Sibony.
Thank you. And just this idea, and that was a whole different piece, but the concept is that the world that we see, even the results that we see, how much of that is from noise, how much is directed, but we are filled with a world where we have so much coming at us that it's hard to really know what to pay attention to.
It really is hard. I think one of the big challenges we have is that it's not just noise, but it's also the volume of the stuff that's coming at us. That I feel like there's this imbalance in our world that the loud voices are easily more persuasive, right? We end up over-indexing on loud voices. I guess that's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But influencers as a great example, right?
Yeah. And just because they're loud or they're outrageous and they get a lot of attention, and it's a sad part of our human kind of makeup, but we're drawn to the outrageous. We're drawn to the loud. We have been, evolutionarily designed to pay attention to those things, right? So they draw our attention to them, and they're not necessarily what we should be paying attention to.
Right.
We need to. So it's going. All right. So here we go. William James, back in 1890, right, in the Principles of Psychology. Love William.
Boom. Again,
Danny Kahneman, William James, we could probably solve all the world's, issues just from those two, right? There we go. There, but so he wrote back in 1890 about attention, and he said it is the taking possession by the mind in clear and vivid form of one out of what may seem several simultaneous possible objects or trains of thought. It implies withdrawal from some things in order to deal effectively with others. That, I think, is the key piece of this, right? It is this idea that what do we pay attention to? Possible objects or trains of thoughts. We have a myriad of those possibilities, but we have to withdraw from some of those things in order to deal effectively with others. And so are we withdrawing from the loud, contagious influencers who are out there shouting at us? Or are we giving them the attention? Because if we don't withdraw from them, then we can't effectively deal with the other important things in our life.
And I want to emphasize this aspect of what you're giving up, what you're not focusing on, is equally as important as understanding what we are focusing on. That if we're going to make a choice, if we're going to execute our agency, it's worth being thoughtful about, okay, if I choose path A, there are 3 other paths that I can identify, even though there might be 150,000 other paths. I've identified 3 or 4 others that I'm not going to take, that I'm not going to act on. Or it might mean I was doing B and I'm not going to be doing B because I'm going to be doing A.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Yeah.
And I'm not even religious. Okay. There you go.
Yeah.
But this is really, when we think about this, concept, attention requires us to not pay attention to other things. And so by default, we are giving up on those things. And the sad fact of today's world is that our attention is being, as we said in the beginning, right? Politicians, our leaders, brands, social influencers are all vying for that attention. And it is a key piece of what we need to really focus in on. Are those the things that we really want to be paying attention on?
Yeah. Okay. So let's actually talk a little bit about some of the traps that Nuala identified in the book, because I think the perimeters, judgment traps, are really good as a way of helping us sort of be aware of, like, because it's got to start with some level of awareness.
Yeah.
So I think that she laid them out really nicely. We didn't talk about them in any great detail during our conversation with her, but I just want to call attention to them overall because I think they're really valuable.
Yeah, perimeters. There's 10 different judgment traps that she talks about, right? Power, ego, risk,
identity,
memory, ethics,
time,
emotion, relationship, stories. And each of them she goes into. And so, get the book and read more about them. But Tim, we have had a pre-copy of the book. You've read it.
Yep.
What is what trap do you often fall into?
Well, I'm going to admit that I see myself falling into many of these in different situations.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. They're often contextually based, right? But
yes,
of those, which one, Tim? Just pick one. You have to pay attention and focus in on just the one.
I hate that. We play this with our guests, and I think it's a terrible thing to do. But emotions, I think, are the big one, and the problem with emotions are that we end up reacting to things. The trap around emotion is that we react to something rather than actually think about it.
Yeah.
So we have this instantaneous judgment around that's good or that's bad, or that pisses me off or that pleases me. And so the emotional trap is this falling into an instantaneous reaction rather than being thoughtful.
Yeah.
And it's instinctive and it's impulsive. And for me, I have to take a breath. I have to go, okay, wait a minute. I'm feeling this source of typically it's an irritation.
it's often with me. Okay. I know. Often with me.
And all the time with you, every day. But it's not so much like, how am I going to solve it? Just I just can't think about the solution other than I recognize it and I go, I just have to take a breath.
That's interesting.
Just slow down.
Because again, I don't see you as an overly emotional response in many of these situations. So
because I'm so damn good at managing it.
You've conquered this one. No, I think you do a good job, but it's really true. I mean, it's one that I fall prey to. The one for me that actually, after reading this book, became clear is memory. It's this idea of that I assume that my memory. So here's the dig on this one. I know that my memory isn't perfect, and I understand that at a very basic level. And I know I don't have. I mean, this. I can't remember people's frickin' names. It's like we talk about a research thing, and I can kind of remember some of the concepts, and you can name off the title and the journal that it was in and the authors, and I'm just amazed because my memory doesn't work that way. But I do have this other aspect where I have a strong belief that the memories that I do hold, they're right,
are perfect.
And I've gotten in retrospect, I look back at that and I'm going, oh yeah, I've made mistakes, right? There's this, the accuracy of that memory, the truth of that memory. Well, this is what we did. And it's like, my kids are going, no, that's not what we did. I go, yes, it was. And it's like, no. And then they bring up actual proof and I go, oh crap, I was wrong. Right. And so, but so we have these, elements of accuracy and truth that we miss in different pieces. Yeah.
But of course, just got to do a little shout out to Laurie Santos at Yale. Knowing is not even half the battle.
Right.
So it's important to be aware. It is really important to be aware. But that only gets us halfway there.
Yeah, well, and so with that, it isn't possible to avoid these traps. That I think is one of the important things to take away from this. However, we do need to be aware of them. But as you said, it's not even half the battle, right? It's G.I. Joe fallacy. But what we can do is set up our environment or give ourselves tools to help overcome these traps. And that is where I think, again, one of the good things about what that Nuala's book does is, she does that, right?
Yeah. Well, and I just want to say that I think that if you really, when you read the book, we're just going to assume that you're going to go out and buy the book, and you're going to read through the perimeters, judgment traps, and you're going to see how the biases sort of line up. And this is work that has been well traveled, right? There's a great body of work understanding what the biases are. Nuala's frame, I think, is important, but where her work is particularly additive is in the solutions, in the tools and tips. And I think that it's novel and worthwhile. And if you're going to become a decision ninja, as she says,
I love
that, then it's about the solution tools.
Right. And to your point, I think there is a good deal of the literature has identified these things. And so Nuala's approach is just really in the fresh way of looking at it and providing frameworks. But it's powerful. And that's the power of this. And so again, her big kind of, all right, perimeters is the biases, but now the solutions is sonic, right? Slow down, organize your attention, navigate novel perspectives, interrupt mindsets, and calibrate situations, strangers, and strategies. And in the book, she gets into all of these. And again, we didn't talk about this a lot. So I think, for groovers, for you guys to listen. So like, what are some of the things? So slow down. Great. Yes, I know that's the knowledge part, but what are some of the tools? And she talks about the 5 whys. Like, it's that old question, like ask why, and then why again, ask it 5 times. And by doing that, you dig down underneath all the time on these things. And that really helps you just like, instead of just asking one why, keep asking that, slow down, get more information before that decision gets made,
I'd also say on the 5 whys, if you get to like the 3rd why and you're like, that's all there is. I just want to challenge you, keep asking why. Why is it that you're stopping there? Because the 5 whys are 5 for good reason, because it's really worth pushing on to the next level. Another thing that really contributes to slowing down, this is the S in Sonic, is arguing against the argument.
Yeah.
Like, what's the counter punctual part of this? What's the part that's going to say, well, what if that's not true?
Yeah. You take the opposite view, right? Take that opposite perspective, particularly when you have an answer, and go back in and say, think about this. If you were giving a presentation to the press corps, right? And then what is that gotcha journalist is going to ask you? What's the question that they're going to ask, right? And answer that. And then like you have to think about that from that perspective. And by doing that hopefully, again, it'll slow you down. Now, one thing she doesn't talk about, but I've used often in like the work that I do with companies and corporations around decision making, is it's a little kind of mind heuristic that I talk about: 2 breaths, 7 breaths. I talked about this before on the show, but again, don't make sure that you wait 2 breaths before you make a decision, but make your decision before you finish the 7th breath.
Yeah, right.
It's a way of slowing down, but also, and again, this isn't like am I buying a house or not? Don't make that decision within 7 breaths. Or if I hear a car honking at me as I'm crossing a street, don't wait 2 breaths before you make a decision on getting out of the way. But in those everyday kind of mundane routine decisions that we're making of, am I going to have the fish or chicken? Am I going to, respond to that email right now, or am I going to wait? Right. And you can, sometimes those, you just need to slow down a little bit, take those couple breaths. And then sometimes you just need to make sure that you give yourself a time limit on those. So,
okay. That's S in Sonic. The next letter in Sonic is O for organize your attention. What do you do to organize your attention?
So, she talks about a bunch of different things in here. And one that I loved in the book that she talks about is the Pomodoro method. And if I mispronounce that, I apologize. But basically, the Pomodoro method is an old, it's been around for a long time, but basically giving yourself a set time, 25 minutes, and then where you focus and you set a timer. You actually set a timer that says, I am going to focus on this. And by just doing that, and then you take a 5-minute break, and then you come back and you can set the timer again. That for me is really powerful, because all of a sudden it's like you're setting your mind frame that I have 25 minutes to focus on this one thing. And I love it. You?
I'm a big fan of Pomodoro as well. I think that it's just terrific, and I use it all the time. And typically, like in 40-minute or 45-minute sessions, but especially when I want to do sort of more deep work. The thing that I also rely on is that Nuala wrote in the book about the decision environment and redesigning the decision environment, because context matters. I am Captain Context Matters. If you're going to make different decisions, you need a different environment. It's going to be amplified and enhanced by having a different environment that you're making the decisions in.
Or just understand, what does your office look like? I mean, I'm looking around at my office right now and I'm like, ugh, I can't be making great decisions in here. Obviously, must have been going on for like 6-7 years. How long have we been doing this podcast? Because I made the decision to work with you, right? So obviously it's because of the environment and how crazy it is. It's not a nice, organized, systematic one.
Or how incredibly fostering it has been to get 6.5 years worth of more than 400 episodes done. Yeah.
All right. Terrific. Let's get on to the end. Navigate novel perspectives. And the one that I liked, and again, these are from her book, and so go out there. We talked a little bit about de Bono's thinking hats in the episode. I like that, but I like this one. Always consult before deciding, the ACBD model, right?
Always consult before deciding. Okay. Yeah, cool.
So, and she talks about it in the book. It was from Harvard Law School's Dan Shapiro, ACBD. And it's just this idea of getting other people's opinions before making a decision. And we know, and again, like, you don't use this every single, again, I'm not going to get somebody else's decision if there's a horn honking at me as I'm crossing the road, right? That's not the case. No,
Right.
But, if I am making that decision about chicken or fish, and I'm, it's like, all right, well, have you had the chicken or fish, Tim? Yeah, I had. Did you like the fish? Yeah, I love the fish. It was really great. Okay. That I'm consulting before my decision. And I'm asking you to get that information. Yeah.
Okay. I, under Sonic, is interrupt mindsets. And Nuala talks about interrupting yourself. Right? Default to something other than just your default. Like stop the process and go, wait a minute, and interrupt that. And I think that that's a really wonderful thing. It's hard for me to do. So what I tend to turn to is adopting a third ear. Like imagining, wait a minute, there's somebody else out here listening to this conversation, and what would they be hearing? So that it's not so much mindset, it's this imaginary third person out here with a third ear. And that ends up helping me go, okay, wait a minute, I need to hear this from a different perspective. And my mindset is constricting me. What's this other imaginary third person out here?
Yeah.
What are they hearing?
And I've always, it's interesting. I've used this in workshops as well, is imagine that there is a video camera up above you watching, your interactions with somebody else, right? And, often many of our decisions are made between two people in the conversations that we're having. And the fact of the matter is that by having that outside perspective, it allows you to think about what you're doing and how you're talking and presenting, and even your body language and different things. And you think about it from that perspective, that changes it. Okay. I can see, that outside perspective, I think, is really cool. All right. Last one, calibrate situations, strangers, and strategies. Right. And so again, she talks about here, there's 3 different things that she talks about. The perimeters bias checklist, which again is just going in and looking and, hey, where are you? Are any of these biases, are any of these pieces, coming in and having a impact on what you're doing? I think that's great there. And then she talks about implementation intentions, which again, we've talked about a lot, right? It's the if-then plans, which are powerful. And again, they're not a silver bullet. They don't always work, but you're going in to a situation that's going to be emotional. You talked about emotions being one of your big pieces. And we know that those emotions will impact our decision, our ability to make a good decision. Well, if you preset, if X happens, then I will do Y. It's not saying that you're always going to do Y, but you're more likely to do Y. And so I think that's what I use. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a way of rehearsing in advance almost, because thinking through situations gives you that opportunity to go, here's a couple things that could happen. So why don't I think through what I would do when A or B happens to me?
Yep.
So we're not just out there trying to, be jazzy and improvise on the spot.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay, Kurt, what else do we want to talk about? I think that's important on Sonic.
Do you have any other strategies that you use when you're thinking about decision making? You've made some pretty big decisions in the past few years. And I know that this isn't always about big decisions, but how do you go about making those big? I mean, you took a new job, you moved, a whole bunch of different things. How do you make those decisions?
Well, scaling is part of it. Like, what are the big decisions that actually need more time and more energy? And time is a critical part of this. And then what are the decisions that don't require a lot of time? Like if it's fish or chicken, let's put that in the really simple category of inconsequential decisions and just make the damn decision and keep going and not stress about it. The bigger decisions, time matters. And something that I've held on to for a long time that I've used was a management tip back in grad school was don't make a decision until you have to. It's okay to actually say, I don't actually have to decide on this particular thing right now. I'm working on this project. I've got a deadline of 2 weeks away. I'm going to have to turn over a report to my boss, in 10 days time. If I don't have to decide what like the headline is for that until the day before I turn it over, let that ruminate in the back of my mind. Let my unconscious work on that. And it's okay to put that off. While I'm constructing and putting it all together, let the headline just sit in the background. And then I can decide on the headline when I'm done, when I'm actually finished writing the report. I'm ready to turn over.
Zeigarnik effect. There you go. At work right there. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But
absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah, how about you?
I love
Kurt?
that idea though of like too often we feel the pressure. And again, this comes back into finding your groove to a certain degree, right? I mean, we feel pressured to make the decision now. I'm always amazed at those people who like their boss asks them something and they do it skillfully. I'm not saying that they're one of these people that just, but they push off like the boss. Well, what do you think? And they can skillfully and do this in a manner that says, I'm not sure right now. I need to think about this a little bit more. And in so doing, you get that time to actually think through the right decision as opposed to responding in the moment because there's some social or other type of pressure that you feel that may be real or may not be real. And those are the pieces that I love.
Or if the boss asks a question that is not answered or not answerable yet, I think it's a great thing to say, so if the question you're asking is, are we able to do this, or the data, what does the data show? We don't have the data to answer that right now. So I could hazard a guess, boss, or we could take, give me a couple of days and I'll research that and I'll get back to you.
And I love how you just reframe that, right? You took their question. It's a great communication tool. It's repeating back what they just asked with an interpretation of it. So here's what I heard you say. And so if you're asking me this, then this, right? And then they can go, well, that wasn't what I was asking you. Or they can then realize that, oh, yes, that is. So yes, let's go with that. All right. Last piece, Tim. We talk a lot about finding your groove. And one of the things that just struck me about this whole conversation with Nuala is that tuning in is a part of finding your groove. when I think about it. And I'm just wondering to get your thoughts on this. And now, let me give you a little bit of my thinking on this and it goes back to the conversation about coffee and various different things. Part of finding your groove is understanding what to pay attention to that is going to make your life in the long run a better, more satisfying life that you will look back on and go, yes, I have lived the best life that I can. And I think to a great degree that is dependent upon what we choose from James, from William James's kind of thing, what we pay attention to and what we therefore ignore. So for me, it's really important.
Do you have a tool that you use, some kind of a rubric or anything that helps you get through that?
For the attention part, I don't. The piece that I keep coming back to, and you and I have been working on this for a long time and thinking about it and talking with experts who are much brighter than us about this. And one of the things that I keep coming back to is this concept of savoring, this idea of what can we, like the actual process of savoring things, the savoring the moment, savoring the process, savoring this, as opposed to, again, it's the tuning in part, right? I mean, part of savoring is tuning in to what's going on right now, as opposed to just letting it fly by. It's the difference between enjoying this cup of coffee and my instant coffee with cream, which I know will probably get people responding back. How can you ever savor something like that? Or just slugging it down. That I think is a big piece.
You've talked about this sometimes in our conversations as the sunset groove of just enjoying the sunset. And I love that image. Mm-hmm. I really love that image of, are you enjoying the sunset? And maybe it's not a spectacular sunset. Maybe it's not, you're, of course, when you're on vacation and you're at a beach doing something like that, or some exotic locale, watching the sunset, from the Trevi Fountain in Rome is amazing, right? But what about just enjoying the sunset in your backyard?
Yes.
Or from your window of your apartment? Like, yeah, savoring this sunset groove, I think it's a great reminder, Kurt.
Well, I love it. And the piece about that, Tim, is that too often we don't, because we're not tuned into it, right? So we don't savor the everyday mundane. And there's a lot to savor in the everyday mundane. And the is beautiful almost always, right? I mean, it may not be. It may not be the sunset, as you said, over the ocean, but man, the sunset out of my backyard. If I actually paid attention to it every day, I think my life would be better.
That's the way to find your groove right there. Okay. I think we could probably wrap this up.
Yeah.
Is that cool for you?
Yeah. Big shout out to Nuala for joining us. It's always a pleasure and informative when we have our friend Nuala on the show.
So if you like this episode, if you like any of the other episodes, if you like they thought we were ridiculous, if they thought you liked any of the Cialdini episodes, if you liked anything that we've ever talked about, please just give us a like, give us a quick review, share it with a friend. We'd really appreciate it.
And if you really, 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 really like us, please just leave us a review. As we said in the front, it's only 27 seconds or so. I think Tim timed it. Yeah. All of these things go a long way in helping us grow this podcast to get more listeners who can benefit from some of the wisdom that our guests bring. I said our guests because I don't know how much wisdom we bring, Tim, but Well,
with that, Groovers, we hope that you tune in this week. Tune in to help you go out and find your groove.